Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on a truly astonishing stack of sources, documents, and historical narratives that give us this stunning, granular view of a world.
A world really defined by the cruel geometry of sugar and the explosive pursuit of freedom.
Exactly. We are plunging into the late 18th and early 19th centuries, traveling from the brutal, feverish plantations of Saint-Domingue. I mean, this was the economic engine of the French Caribbean,
Right.
all the way to the layered, sophisticated, but, equally contradictory society of New Orleans, Louisiana.
It's a remarkable set of materials because it forces us to confront these huge historical forces: slavery, revolution, rigid racial politics,
Right.
not as abstract concepts, but through the intensely specific, minute realities of the people who actually lived through them.
So our mission today is to do just that.
Exactly. To extract the hard, often painful facts of this world, we need to dissect the economic drivers that necessitated constant human destruction, the psychological architecture of these racial codes, and the powerful, relentless, often hidden mechanisms of resistance that ultimately sparked a revolution.
Absolutely. And the central figure guiding our understanding through all this is Zarité, known to her master as Tet.
Her life is just a profound study in resilience and adaptation.
It really is. She begins as a slave in these unforgiving sugar fields, belonging to a planter who, considers himself a modern man of the Enlightenment.
The irony is just palpable from page one.
Her journey forces us to unpack how the systems of slavery, both the French colonial model and the later Creole one, how they adapted or resisted change. We have to look at the powerful indigenous resistance of voodoo and these almost unbelievable social codes that dictated a person's worth based, literally on fractions of their heritage.
And our goal is to understand that profound, systemic hypocrisy of the planter class. These were men who slept with Rousseau's social contract next to their bed while owning hundreds of human beings.
We have to connect the Byzantine complexity of racial identity, what was it, over 60 classifications?
60-plus classifications, yes.
Mhm.
To the relentless, two-pronged fight for freedom waged not only politically on the battlefield, but personally, in quiet acts of defiance, for dignity, and ultimately for love in a world that tried to deny it entirely.
Okay, so let's start exactly where the sources start. In the crucible of Habitation Salazar, the sugar plantation owned by Toulouse-Valmorin.
You really can't understand Saint-Domingue without understanding the sheer crushing economics of sugar.
The sources refer to the crop almost reverently, don't they? The sweet gold of the colony.
They do. But this gold was purchased at an unimaginable human cost. The description of the labor, the cutting, the crushing, the boiling, it was stated explicitly by the planters themselves.
What did we say?
That it was labor not for humans, but for beasts.
For beasts.
Yes, and that wasn't a metaphor for harshness. It was a foundational statement about their business model. They viewed the human workers as disposable, non-human inputs.
And we have chilling, specific data points to back that up. One observation from Valmorin himself, the planter, regarding his enslaved workforce.
I know the one you mean.
It was that they lasted an average of only 18 months before dying of fatigue or escaping. 18 months. Just think about the entire logic that flows from that number.
That 18-month metric is the key. It's the key to understanding why Saint-Domingue was such a volatile, violent society. Unlike plantations growing, say, tobacco or cotton in other parts of the Americas, where planters invested in sustaining their labor force for decades.
They relied on natural population growth.
Exactly. But sugar was so deadly that it created this system of rapid replacement. Why sustain a slave for 30 years when you can work them to death in 18 months and just buy a new, cheaper one at auction?
So the sources state that between 20 and 30,000 slaves were auctioned off annually, just to keep the population stable.
Stable. Not to grow it, just to replace the dead. It was an industrial-scale machine of human annihilation.
And this constant influx of newly arrived Africans who would have had fewer cultural ties and been, more defiant.
It just fed the internal chaos and the planters' paranoia.
And this calculation of who was valuable extended even to mothers and children.
Yes. The sources note that women lived slightly longer than the men, but they were often seen as problematic. And the reason? They had the bad habit of getting pregnant.
That phrasing is just...
It's chilling. And few of those children survived the first few months anyway because of the conditions. The fact that the sources dismiss fertility as not being a good source of income shows this stark utilitarian dismissal of the basic human need to reproduce to create family.
They were focused solely on immediate labor output.
That was it.
It's hard to reconcile this cold, transactional horror with the man who ran the place, Toulouse Valmorain. He arrives at age 20, dressed elegantly.
Well, the lace cuffs, the powdered wig, the high heels.
And he considers himself a true man of letters, steeped in the Enlightenment.
The contradiction is almost unbearable to read. Here's a youth who admired the great philosophers, the encyclopedists. He had Rousseau's Social Contract as his bedside book at 18.
A text fundamentally about the natural liberty of man.
And he arrives to inherit a fortune built on the most extreme, calculated form of human exploitation ever devised.
The reality he found was a complete desecration of his philosophical ideals. His father was dying of syphilis la mal espagnole.
And was described as passing his time with prepubescent black girls.
Valmorain curses his luck, right? He's trapped in this primitive and violent world. But here's the crucial pivot. He doesn't sell the plantation. He doesn't free the slaves.
No. He curses, and then he immediately rolls up his sleeves. He applies his methodical, rational European mind, the very mind shaped by the Enlightenment, not to moral questions, but to efficiency.
He saw it as a management problem.
Precisely. He implemented methodical changes to save the financially ruinous estate, reducing punishments slightly, even hiring a veterinarian to treat the slaves.
And he succeeded. Spectacularly. He multiplied the export volume of unrefined sugar by 5 within 3 years.
So he attempts to make slavery this rational, manageable evil, a form of what he called humanitarian labor management.
But the system was still fundamentally devastating. The sources give us that haunting anecdote. His own personal valet, whom he supposedly treated better than anyone.
He died of fulminating diarrhea in under 38 hours.
That must have been a devastating realization, that no amount of Enlightenment philosophy or good intentions could overcome the inherent deadliness of the sugar machine.
It leads us directly to Valmorain's profound moral paradox. He sincerely believes he's a just master compared to his neighbors.
He buys into his own press.
Completely. He agrees with the premise that slavery is a necessary evil, the only way to manage a plantation, but he insists it can be done in a humanitarian way.
And the tragedy is that the philosophy that preaches liberty and rationality provides him with the very tools he needs to rationalize his exploitation. To see the enslaved as economic variables, not human beings.
Which is when the physician, Dr. Parmentier, who's observing the plantation, just delivers the ultimate simple retort to this philosophical self-deception.
It can never be humanitarian to own and exploit another human.
That line just cuts straight through Valmorain's entire worldview.
It does. And this intense need to categorize and rationalize, it extended beyond the master-slave relationship. It poisoned the entire social fabric of Saint-Domingue.
It was a society defined by obsessive, rigid stratification, all designed to keep everyone fighting everyone else.
You had the wealthy planters, the Grands Blancs, like Valmorain.
Then the Petits Blancs, the poor, envious whites, often merchants or criminals, whose only real capital was the color of their skin.
And then the affranchise.
The free people of color, often mulattoes, who had achieved significant wealth and education themselves.
What's truly remarkable, and it really speaks to the level of social engineering employed by the French crown, is the bureaucratic obsession with race. The sources mention 60-plus classifications.
More than 60 classifications for a franchise, set by the precise percentage of white blood. These fractions determined everything.
Everything. From marriage prospects to the clothes they could wear, their entire social level.
That degree of bureaucratic precision shows the government was deeply, pathologically afraid of social fluidity. They needed these classifications to ensure that the affranchised, who might control significant wealth or own slaves themselves,
would never align with the enslaved majority.
And the system worked perfectly to prevent solidarity. The affranchised aspired fiercely to pass for white, purchasing white tutors and clothing, and they held a visceral scorn for Negroes.
This horizontal conflict, manufactured by the French state, kept the elite whites secure above this enormous silent majority.
A majority who numbered 10 times greater than the whites and affranchised combined, yet counted for nothing, neither in the census of the population nor in the colonists' conscience.
Their deliberate invisibility was the foundation of the white world's delusion of control.
As long as the oppressed could be convinced to fight among themselves based on fractions of blood, the whole rotten system could endure.
But we know that silence was about to be broken.
Before the drums start sounding, though, we need to quickly look at the complicated world of the affranchised and their white protectors, specifically through Violet Boisier and Capitaine Etienne Roulet.
Follett is a free mulata courtesan, a cocotte, operating in Le Cap, which they mockingly called the Paris of the Antilles.
Her life was a high-risk, high-reward profession described as short-lived. She had to be a master strategist to navigate that world.
A master of exploiting the limited power she had, luminous, ripened quickly, and she relied completely on her loyal slave, Lula.
Not just for domestic support, but for protection and financial intelligence.
And Capitaine Etienne Roulet, her eventual husband, is yet another profound paradox in uniform.
Oh, he's known for military rectitude and integrity, yet he's described as a man who did not hesitate to sacrifice his men in battle, or to torture a child to obtain information from his mother.
That's the kind of moral schizophrenia the colony bred.
He is derailed by falling instantly in love with Violette after seeing her in a magic show.
And his plan, which reveals the depth of their racial poison in Saint-Domingue, was to save money and take her to France.
Right, where her mixed blood wouldn't be evidence so they could marry without scrutiny. He couldn't solve the problem of race in the Caribbean, so his plan was to run away to a place where he thought it didn't exist.
They ultimately defy society by marrying publicly, scandalizing his military peers.
And even in this seemingly stable union, they are forced into the illicit side of colonial commerce smuggling, lending money at interest, using Lula's sharp financial sense.
And this brings us to that astonishing moment with Lula.
Oh, it's incredible. Relays offers to emancipate her, a kindness, a gesture of freedom. And she throws herself to the floor, wailing, terrified.
Convinced they were trying to abandon her because she was old and useless.
She preferred the certainty of slavery to the terrifying precarity of the color line. She forces him to promise she can be a slave to her last breath if she wants.
That single refusal throws the entire concept of freedom into question.
It does. For Lula, freedom meant terrifying insecurity and abandonment. This highlights just how fragile legal freedom truly was for free people of color in that society, particularly if they lacked the sophisticated network Violet had built.
It makes you realize that emancipation was often just step one, not the ultimate solution.
Not even close.
So having seen the mechanics of oppression, let's shift focus now to the deep cultural infrastructure of resistance that grew out of that sugar ground, moving into Zarite's world. Her mentor was Honor, a fellow slave whose body was broken, but whose spirit remained profoundly free.
Honore is the embodiment of cultural memory. He carried sounds inside his body. He had brought them from Dahomey and could draw music from anything, a pukpot, a piece of wood.
He taught Zarite the drums.
And instilled in her the importance of music as an act of spiritual and mental defiance. The lesson he imparted is unforgettable. Dance, dance. Zarite, the slave who dances, is free while he is dancing.
A temporary, ecstatic rejection of the chains.
Exactly. And this cultural heritage was tied directly into voodoo. Honore took Zarite to dances and voodoo services from infancy. She learned that the Christian gods of the whites were enemies.
Her doll, Erzuli, Mother of Guinea, was sacred and far more powerful than the white saints the masters worshipped.
Voodoo in Saint-Domingue wasn't simply a religion. It was a comprehensive philosophical, medical, and social infrastructure that operated in parallel to the colonial system.
And Tante Rose, the Mambo, represents the healing and spiritual power of this system.
She was a Dr. Foyd, a leaf doctor who treated both slaves and animals, and her influence extended far beyond St. Lazare.
She was so widely respected that even the brutal head overseer, Prosper Cambrai, feared her.
He was worried she would turn him into a zombie. That fear gave her a level of leverage and protection that no slave should have possessed.
And we see the tension between the white scientific world and the African spiritual world play out through Dr. Parmentier.
Right. He was observing voodoo trances and rituals, comparing them intellectually to Eugenia's obsessive Catholic rituals. But he was pragmatic. He recognized voodoo's profound social function, noting that it gave a sense of meaning to the miserable existence of the slaves.
He was even annotating Tante Rose's remedies for his own book,
suggesting a desire to understand and perhaps culturally appropriate this indigenous knowledge for his own scientific advancement.
The fear voodoo inspired among the white ruling class was palpable. Valmoraine's wife, Eugenia, was paranoid,
believing her unborn child was a zombie, cursed by the drums she constantly heard.
So Tante Rose, using her full authority, performed complex rituals and gave Eugenia a nauseating tisane.
A tisane that supposedly caused the urine to turn blue, confirming the cure. This is a powerful cultural intervention. Tante Rose successfully used the white mistress's own fears and beliefs against her.
She wasn't just curing a perceived illness.
No, she was asserting the power of the African spiritual system within the master's house, and the master's wife was forced to submit to it.
This fear of the enslaved had deep historical roots, dating back to the legacy of McCandless, the earlier Maroon leader.
Yes, the sources note that since his time, even fine ladies enjoyed watching the ritualized execution of rebellious slaves. They viewed these public spectacles of cruelty as proving their refinement and taste for power.
This just demonstrates that the whole colony was a pressure cooker validated by ritualized violence. They knew the rebellion was coming because they constantly committed atrocities to ward it off.
But they convinced themselves that the enslaved population was too disorganized, too primitive, to coordinate anything on a grand scale.
That belief was violently shattered by the events of Bois-Cayman.
The news of the planned assembly spread swiftly through the only network the slaves could trust, the drums. The sources emphasized that the sound traveled from kalinda to kalinda,
From dance to dance, from temple to temple.
moving farther and faster than the roar of a storm.
The Bois-Cayman ceremony was not just a prayer service, was it?
No, it was the organizational and spiritual nexus of the Haitian Revolution. Maroons descended from the mountains. Tante Rose, the Mambo, was mounted by the Loa of War, Ogun.
Ogufer.
And this is the key detail. The invocation of the spirit of war meant this gathering was an explicit act of military mobilization, not just spiritual solace.
In this transformation, she shed her lameness, grew younger, and became invisible to the police.
The Loa, through her mouth, demanded nothing less than the end of slavery and total rebellion.
The power of that moment was so overwhelming that it broke through the... And we get that fascinating historical footnote. Toussaint Louverture, the figurehead of the successful revolution, he wasn't initially named a chief at Bois-Cayman.
No, he joined weeks later, and notably only after ensuring his master's family was put in a safe place.
This small detail highlights the cautious, strategic nature of his initial involvement, which contrasts sharply with the raw, immediate spiritual agency of the Bois-Cayman attendees.
It really does.
Now we have to look at the toxic master-slave dynamic between Zarité and Valmorain, which is exposed completely during the chaos of the revolution.
Zarité was Valmorain's concubine, a fact that was a constant source of tension and secrecy. Valmorain fathered Tété's first son, but upon the boy's birth,
He was immediately taken away, given to the relay couple to be raised.
and when Tete became pregnant again, this time with Rosette, Valmorain showed a chilling calculation, allowing her to keep the baby, thinking it won't matter now to Eugenia, who was by then completely disconnected from reality.
It was a decision made out of convenience and indifference.
And in the midst of all this emotional and political turmoil, Zarité provides that extraordinary moment of philosophical defiance.
When Valmorain, in his rationalist stupor, questioned whether blacks were truly human,
Zarité gave the perfect, unanswerable retort, delivered with eyes fixed on the floor, using his own philosophical framework against him.
a being who is not human has no opinions, Major.
That line, which stunned and amused Dr. Parmentier, is pure genius. Valmorain had just asked her opinion, implicitly recognizing her capacity for thought and therefore her humanity.
By answering that she couldn't have an opinion if she were non-human, she forced him into a logical cul-de-sac.
He either had to recognize her as human or admit that his question was absurd. It was an intellectual act of liberation years before the physical one.
The situation quickly accelerates into chaos, forcing Valmorain from his role as master to desperate negotiator. The escape scene is the ultimate confrontation.
Valmorain returns to the plantation, often drunk, only to be warned by Gambo.
Zaret's actual maroon lover and the father of Rosette.
He warns him that rebels were coming to slaughter them all. Valmorain is entirely reliant on the knowledge and loyalty of the people he claims to own.
Zarité seizes the moment, leveraging her indispensable knowledge of the terrain and the looming threat as her ultimate weapon.
She bursts into Valmorain's drunken state and demands freedom for herself and Rosette in exchange for leading him and Maurice, his legitimate son, to safety.
And in an audacious physical act of defiance, she grabs his wrist during the negotiation.
Asserting her power for the first time, not just intellectually, but physically.
Valmorain, facing the guillotine or the machete, is utterly defeated. He signs the freedom paper.
And Gambo, the warrior, leads them away from the plantation, securing their passage past the immediate danger. But he refuses to go further toward the white world.
He tells Ted, "I have done my part. I got them away from the plantation alive," and leaves her.
That moment is so crucial. Gambo criticizes her choice to remain with the white master temporarily, even if it was to protect her newly secured freedom paper.
The implication is clear. Gambo's freedom is ideological and complete. He's choosing the revolution and the true liberation of the mountains.
While Zarite's freedom is pragmatic and protective, she needs that paper, and the Master's presence is the temporary shield she needs for herself and Rosette until they reach the safety of the port.
It's a calculation of survival over ideology.
Yes. And now the sources show Valmoraine, Tete, and Maurice completing their transition to the second key setting of our deep dive. New Orleans. They arrive as French refugees, displaced by the terror first via a stopover in Cuba.
The time in Havana is brief, but economically telling. Valmoraine finds life entertaining, but he realizes he cannot leave his money in the hands of his brother-in-law, Sancho Garcia del Solar.
No, he was far too concerned with parties, women, horses, and gaming tables. It's a temporary reprieve, not a new home.
And Sancho, ever the opportunist, convinces Valmoraine that the future lies in Louisiana.
His sales pitch was compelling because he focused on stability. French culture was already there, the land was cheap under Spanish government, and most importantly, no politically motivated slave uprisings.
After Saint-Domingue, the promise of quiet, non-revolutionary exploitation was Valmoraine's greatest desire.
The result was a massive, destabilizing influx. Thousands of French families poured into Louisiana Grands Blancs, military figures like Relais, and a franchise like Dr. Parmentier's family, and later Velet Boisier.
And they were deeply resented first by the Cubans and later by the Louisianans. They feared the destabilizing influence of the Antilleans and their radicalized ideas, even those ideas related to voodoo and racial mixing.
This sets the stage for the core contrast.
Yeah.
The new system of slavery Valmoraine encounters in New Orleans. Valmoraine, still haunted by the economics of his old life, had warned Sancho that sugar consumption would continue even if the lumps were crimson.
But the New Orleans Creoles maintained a very clear veneer of civility. They insisted that the sugar atrocities of Saint-Domingue did not occur in Louisiana and that cruelty was badly viewed.
This is a different type of slavery, one wrapped in paternalism and careful calculation. The new Irish manager Valmoraine hires, Owen Murphy, exemplifies this shift perfectly.
Murphy's philosophy was that slaves must be treated like children. Authority and justice, clear rules, punishment, reward, and some free time.
He implemented tangible, less brutal rules designed for long-term productivity. Slaves could appeal punishments over 15 lashes, and Murphy refused to whip pregnant women. The plantation also provided much better food and more rest.
Including 2 full days a week for slaves to cultivate their own gardens.
Right, but wait, is this true humanity, or is it just better economic practice?
Well, Valmoraine, reflecting on the brutal realities of his old plantation, realizes with horror that at Saint-Domingue, slaves often gave birth crouching in the cane fields. The contrast is stark, but the underlying motive is still the same: productivity.
It's absolutely better management. Murphy stated the economic logic clearly. The labor force of a plantation cost a third of the value of the land. They had to be looked after.
It was about protecting valuable assets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Better morale meant fewer unforeseen mishaps and better health or spirits of the slaves. The New Orleans Creoles had simply calculated that sustained productivity over 30 years was more profitable than a death cycle of 18 months.
It was still exploitation, just managed with a different spreadsheet.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Moving into New Orleans society itself, we see this fascinating blend of voodoo culture, imported by the refugees, mixing with the established Catholic structure.
And Zarite immediately finds community and cultural continuity. She attends Bambas's slave dances on Sundays at Place Congo, a few blocks from where she lives.
The ritual of the dance was complex. Whites came specifically to be scandalized by the wild African nature of the movements, but Zarite and others danced to make them envious and to give them bad thoughts.
It was a public display of resistance, claiming the only public space they were allowed to occupy.
And the spiritual landscape had to adapt to this new, heavily Catholic environment.
Voodoo brought from Saint-Domingue mixed with Christian beliefs. Zarite's spiritual conflict is encapsulated in her words to the local friar. "The God of the whites frightens me, Père Antoine. He is crueler than Prosper Cambrai."
She's comparing the Christian deity to her former brutal overseer.
This is where Père Antoine, the Capuchin friar known as the Saint, becomes a vital stabilizing force. He offers an incredibly permissive and unifying spiritual view designed to keep the peace.
He allows voodoo, arguing, "My God is the same as your Papa Bondi, but with the different name. Your lows are like my saints. There is room in the human heart for all the divinities."
That's a fascinating interpretation. It allowed voodoo to survive and flourish in New Orleans, becoming part of the unique Creole cultural flavor, but it also, perhaps inadvertently, defanged it.
How so?
By accepting the Lows as saints, Père Antoine prevented voodoo from being seen purely as a revolutionary political organization, like it was in Haiti. It was allowed to be culture, but not necessarily rebellion.
Precisely. It shifted from the military spiritual urgency of Ogon to the cultural preservation embodied by Urzili.
And finally, in this new society, we see Violette Boisier adapting her skills to the New Orleans social architecture, specializing in the system of plaquage.
Plaquage. It was a formal, recognized system of concubinage where wealthy white men would take mixed-race girls, often called quadroons, as mistresses. It sounds like exploitation, but the system had its own rules.
It was necessary exploitation. Violette, with her keen social intelligence, specialized in arranging these relationships, demanding security for the girl, formal contracts, and often education and financial support for her children.
It was an economic survival strategy for free women of color, ensuring some level of stability when legal marriage to white men was impossible or socially destructive.
And Rosette, having lived like a mademoiselle under Zaréte's protection, was exactly the type of beautiful, polished candidate ideal for the system, though Valmorain had his own unsettling ideas for her future.
Let's focus on the absolute core of Zaréte's personal struggle, securing the legal documentation she had risked everything for. Despite possessing the signed and sealed freedom paper for 7 years, Valmorain simply delayed her emancipation.
Valmorain's stalling was the ultimate act of petty, bureaucratic tyranny. He kept asking, "Who will care for my daughters?" He had come to rely completely on her management and care.
And when Tete, seizing the moral high ground, suggested she work for him as a free woman, he was genuinely shocked and exclaimed, "Pay you!"
That one word, pay, strips away all of his veneer of humanitarianism and his Enlightenment readings. Even after the revolution, after everything he witnessed, he could not conceive of the value of Tet's labor existing outside the system of ownership.
To pay her would be to admit she was an equal contracting partner.
And his entire psychological framework rejected that possibility. His motivations were complex. His family honor was tied up in owning property, and Tet was indispensable. She kept his chaotic house running. She managed the domestic slaves. She cared for his son, Maurice.
To lose her would disrupt his entire fragile domestic life in New Orleans, and he preferred the status quo of illegal ownership.
So Tete, having endured this deceit for years, sought out the one person in New Orleans with both moral authority and secular clout, Père Antoine. She showed him the brittle yellow document, and the saint immediately took charge.
This is a powerful, masterful move. The priest, using his saintly reputation and moral authority and the strategic value of surprise, summoned Valmorain, Sancha, and Dr. Parmentier to rectify the misunderstanding.
He forced the issue into the light of institutional religion and social scrutiny, a power Valmorain could not defy without losing face completely in his new home.
Valmorain was furious and humiliated, especially when Tet then dared to demand 7 years of back pay.
An astonishing demand for economic justice. He was silenced only by the priest's presence, and Père Antoine took it a crucial step further, declaring, "Tomorrow she, too, will be free," referring to Rosette.
The emancipation was achieved not through legal battle or revolution, but through moral coercion and the strategic use of an authority figure.
And the response from Valmorain's new, tyrannical, and pregnant wife, Hortense, was immediate and vicious. She was enraged, furious that the Antillians were introducing fearsome African cult in Louisiana, and had Ted immediately thrown out of the house.
The freedom paper was won, but the fight for dignity and acceptance was clearly far from over.
The ultimate battle occurs years later, involving the second generation, and it is horrifyingly violent. It involves Maurice, Valmorain's legitimate son, and Rosette, the daughter of Zarité and Valmorain.
Hortense, obsessed with securing her own future child's inheritance, was determined to eliminate her stepson Maurice from the inheritance line.
She created the confrontation. When Tet, now a free woman, tried to help Hortense with a fitting suggesting pins to fix her dress, Hortense attacked her with a whip, lashing her repeatedly, directing all her accumulated racial and spousal resentment toward Tet.
The resulting explosion was Maurice, then barely 11 years old.
He charged into the room like a bull and shoved his stepmother to the floor, grabbing the whip and lashing her back, delivering a blow to her neck that cut off her scream.
This was the precise traumatic moment Maurice broke with his past, his entitlement, and his father's inherent violence, realizing the horror of the system that created this domestic terror.
That act of physical violence against his stepmother marked his true awakening to injustice. His intellectual turning point came later when he was sent away to school in Boston.
There, he met Harrison Cobb, an abolitionist teacher who profoundly marked him.
Cobb advised him against the typical impulsive but ultimately ineffective abolitionist act, emancipating 200 slaves immediately and becoming poor.
Cobb provided the true strategy for systemic change, and this is the most important intellectual takeaway from this section.
He told Maurice, "The struggle against slavery is not done plantation by plantation. The laws in this country and the world must be changed."
That strategic redirection from individual rescue to political and legal systemic action formed Maurice's life mission.
So Maurice returns home, a changed, focused man. Valmorain, still trapped in the past, attempts to pressure Maurice into a conventional plaquage relationship with Rosette, hoping to stabilize his life and keep the women he controlled close.
Maurice refused, declaring his new purpose. "Abolition, monsieur. I'm going to devote my life to struggling against slavery."
He went further, stating he would emancipate the slaves and sell the plantation if he inherited it, directly attacking the foundation of his father's fortune and identity.
Valmorain, losing control, deployed the most devastating weapon he had to forbid the marriage between his son and Rosette, the incest barrier.
He revealed Rosette's true parentage, shouting, "She's the daughter of a slave. My children are white." The double irony here is staggering.
He used the familial bond he had always denied to enforce the rigid racial barrier he had always upheld.
His greatest fear wasn't incest. It was the loss of his class control and the mixing of the bloodlines he deemed inferior into his legitimate estate.
And Sancho, who was charmed by Rosette, warned Valmorain against killing his son. But he did suggest marrying Maurice to Rosette might be a perverse way to ruin Maurice's social position and claim over the estate.
The corruption of that society ran deep, where ruin could be achieved through marriage.
The dramatic resolution is found through Tété's incredible resourcefulness. Père Antoine refused to marry them due to the sin of incest, but Tête, remembering the priest's precise farewell line, "No one can marry you in this land,"
She recognized the legal and spiritual loophole.
she turned to Zachary, the elegant, now scarred, free man who ran a gaming house. Zachary arranged for a captain to marry them on the high seas, beyond the jurisdiction of the land-based church or colonial law.
They were married on a deplorable schooner flying a Cuban flag by Captain Romero Toledano, with Zachary and the fiercely nonconformist Fleur Hirondelle as witnesses.
The latter wearing a bearskin coat and a necklace of animal teeth.
It was an unofficial, dangerous, but legally sound rebellion against the boundaries of race, law, and family, achieved by using the very marginalized network that colonial society tried to suppress.
They had to literally leave the land to secure their future.
After everything, Zarité finally achieves legal freedom. But as we've discussed, freedom is not equality, and its definition remained incredibly complex, shifting from a legal status to a daily struggle for existence.
Zaréte's post-emancipation life is a testament to her accumulated knowledge and network. She utilized every piece of her history. She worked for Père Antoine doing charity, then joined Violette Boisier's thriving business selling specialized beauty lotions, and Adèle's successful sewing business.
And most profitably, she collaborated with Dr. Parmentier to produce Tante Rose's original herbal remedies. She essentially built a multinational, multicultural consulting business, leveraging her spiritual knowledge, her domestic expertise, and her commercial acumen.
She synthesized her identity, moving seamlessly between the church, the Cocotte network, and the scientific realm.
But the shadow of racial violence remained constant. Zachary, despite his wealth, elegance, and success in the gaming house, was brutally beaten by white men who did not steal his money but attacked him specifically for being overly elegant and generous.
This served as a stark reminder that even with legal papers and riches, freedom was profoundly fragile and conditional for people of color in New Orleans. Dignity was not automatically granted. It had to be fought for daily.
This systemic violence culminates in the final act of domestic tyranny. Hortense Guizot, still enraged and seeing the pregnant Rosette on the street, verbally and physically attacked her.
Rosette, who had never considered herself a slave and lived with privilege, instinctively slapped Hortense back. This resulted in Rosette's arrest and imprisonment.
The ultimate humiliation. Tate, the now free woman, had to return to the Valmorain house and beg Hortense for her daughter's release, only to be rejected and mocked. The legal status had changed, but the underlying power dynamic that allowed a white woman to imprison a pregnant free woman of color hadn't.
During this period, the political landscape shifts dramatically with the sale of Louisiana.
Napoleon sold the vast territory to the Americans for a few cents an acre, a decision that absolutely stunned the Creoles. They feared the new rulers deeply, fearing the barbarians in buffalo skins, the Americans.
And the sources are very clear about why this fear existed. The Creoles saw the Americans as aggressively moralistic, devoid of Creole refinement, and obsessed with work as a virtue.
It was the end of the French way of life, symbolized by the fear that the Americans were materialists, conquerors, and they were infused with a messianic enthusiasm for reforming those who did not think as they did.
This change was catastrophic for the complex social structures. The Creoles, with their systems of plaquage, their voodoo Catholic tolerance, and their more relaxed attitude towards Sunday labor, feared the strict American Protestant ethos and their different approach to the slavery question, one that favored harsher segregation than the fluid, though cruel, French codes.
This political shift added immense pressure onto people like Zarité and Rosette, who relied on the subtleties of Creole society for protection.
Meanwhile, back in Saint-Domingue, the new reality of Haiti was taking shape.
General Dessalines massacred the remaining whites, ending any French claim and triggering another wave of refugees. Dr. Parmentier notes that Dessalines was trying desperately to restore wealth by calling for whites to return to plantations under a system of free labor that required 3 years of forced military-controlled labor.
A disguised and temporary return to slavery designed to shore up the struggling economy of the new Haitian Republic.
Liberation had been achieved, but the economic reliance on sugar extraction made true, sustainable economic freedom almost impossible immediately.
And Zarité finds her final view of freedom in New Orleans, far from the chaos of Haiti or the legal struggles of the Valmorain estate. She finds community, a new life, and spiritual continuity.
She continues to practice voodoo, dancing in the Place Congo with the magical drums of Saint-Domingue. Her definition of freedom is ultimately spiritual, not purely legal or political.
It's found in her final, powerful thought, connecting her back to Honoré's original lesson.
From time to time, Urzuli, Loa of motherhood and love, comes in Mount Zarité. Then we go galloping together to visit my dead ones on the island beneath the sea.
She is legally free, economically independent, and spiritually connected to her ancestors, finally able to visit the realm beneath the waves, a destination that superseded the control of any French master or American law.
The spiritual freedom, learned in the fields of Saint-Domingue, was the one that endured.
What stands out when we reflect on this entire journey is the profound, calculated cruelty of Saint-Domingue, where human life was coldly calculated to last 18 months in the pursuit of sugar wealth.
Death was an input, and the social structure was based on manic, minute racial division.
And when the characters' lives shifted to Louisiana, the system merely changed its guise. Slavery was maintained under a veneer of humanitarian care driven largely by better property management for long-term profit and rigid racial separation like the plaquage system.
But the fundamental injustice and the need for constant struggle remained unchanged.
The sources showcase Zaréte's trajectory. She went from a piece of merchandise used to settle debts and concubinage to a free woman who brilliantly utilized her entire toolkit: voodoo, herbalism, social awareness, and sheer defiance to secure freedom for herself and her daughter.
Ultimately defying both the master and the law in the process of the marriage at sea.
Her victory was immense, but the fight was transferred to the next generation. Rosette and Maurice had to leave that land to find the legal means to be together, and Maurice found his life mission in dismantling the very system that created his family's impossible moral situation.
Realizing that individual acts of liberation were insufficient.
The source material suggests that the greatest barrier to freedom was not the plantation owner's chain, which could be removed by law, but the invisible bonds of race and class that followed these characters wherever they went, whether in Saint-Domingue or New Orleans.
Even after legal freedom was achieved, they had to fight daily for dignity and safety, culminating in Maurice's commitment to dismantle the system entirely, recognizing that legal freedom is only step one.
So we leave you with this provocative thought based on the world Zarité and Maurice navigated. Maurice believed that even if abolition succeeded and legal freedom was achieved, equality, dignity, and acceptance would not follow automatically.
If freedom is the law changing, what fundamental shifts in economic structure, in social perception, or in moral empathy must occur in a deeply divided society for true acceptance and peace to be realized?
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.